So, in chapter Aleph, in the first chapter, by the way, if you want to know where we are on page 6, all the way in the bottom. No, sorry. We're in page 8, all the way in the bottom. That's where we are. Oh, Shalom Aleichem, guys. So this is where we are. So let's do, like I said, a quick preview of where we are holding, how we got there, and who's against whom. So we started with talking about that every Jew has two souls. We say there's a godly soul and there's an animal soul. And quick review of the animal soul. The animal soul is not evil. The animal soul is the soul that God put in every living organism to take care of itself. That's why it wants to survive. The survivability, if we will not have it, we will die. It's the drive to eat, the drive to procreate, the drive to do all the things so the organism can continue into the next generation or into this generation. But it's to survive. That's the idea of the animal soul. Because of that, we said that the animal soul thinks about three people. Me, myself, and I. All three of us it thinks about. The food, it doesn't even care about the food. The food, if the food can do something for me. Yeah, that was the whole idea of this soul is that take care of me. That's what it's there. That's what we discussed in chapter Aleph. We said some people are a little bit more refined, they're a little bit altruistic. In chapter Bet, we started discussing the godly soul. And we said that every Jew, beside having this animal soul, every Jew has a godly soul. And that's something that only Jews have, a godly soul. And every Jew with his godly soul is a child of God. Let's call it this way. He's got God's DNA in him. And then we ask the question, if every Jew has a godly soul, and every Jew is a child of God, has God's DNA in him, how can we see that there are different levels of Jews? There's Jews that only think about God, and there's other Jews who are not even capable of thinking about God. It looks like they're not even the same animal. They're completely different. In other words, there's a Jew like Moshe Rabbeinu, or like Rabbi Akiva, which we're going to discuss him again today. And there's all his life he's thinking about God. And in other words, his soul is so refined that it's experience godliness throughout the day. While our souls are so coarse that even when it comes to holy thing, we do them as commandments, but we don't experience godliness. We don't get excited from putting tefillin every day in the morning. It's not such a big... We get excited from Disneyland more than we get excited from the tefillin. We get excited from ice cream, from beer, from peanuts. More than we get excited than tefillin. So how is it possible that these two things came from the same source? And we gave the analogy of a child. We said, there's God, and if God is a father, if the father wants to bring his DNA to the next generation, you take the seed of the father. And the seed of the father gets implanted in the woman, and then a child develops. And nevertheless, after the child is completely developed, everything came from that first drop. Everything. In other words, the brain of the child came from that drop, and the nails of the child came from that drop. Everything came from that specific drop. What was the difference? The difference was that the mother on the things on the drop that she worked on more becomes more coarse. On the drop that she worked on less becomes less coarse. But nevertheless, the brain of the child and the nails of the child both come from exactly the same drop as the father. And today we have DNA to prove it. The DNA of the father completely can be found within the nails of the father or within the hairs of the fathers, not just within the heart or within the brain. So this was the explanation. And we said this is also with the neshamas. The neshamas came down into this world. We explained that Moshe Rabbeinu came down into this world very quickly. In other words, the mother did not work on him so much, on his neshama, because it passed down through the world only in 6 months. That was, he was a preemie. He was born 3 months earlier. And that symbolizes that the world did not make his neshama coarse. It remained refined. Because it is remained refined, he's like the head of the generation. Moshe Rabbeinu was, like Rabbi is the acronym of Rosh Bnei Israel, the head of the Jewish people, and he became completely refined, completely in tune with godliness. While just like the brain is in tune with the Father. He can think, he can emote, he can do all the things. While some of us are like nails, or like akevaim, are like the heels of the person, which is completely dead. It looks like the thing doesn't have any life in it, those entities. That's what it seems to be like.
But Eliyahu, you said, was the longest pregnancy.
That's right.
It's not above my pay grade to compare Eliyahu to Moshe, but definitely up there. And the Mashiach comes.
Eliyahu was actually the opposite of Moshe. He was completely refined his body. That's why his body was able to elevate up to heaven. Completely different thing we're talking about in some other time. Okay? So that's what we pretty much were last time. We continued to say last time, and this is where we're going to start this week, we continued to say last time that the brain of Mendel is the one that's responsible to give the life to all Mendel's part. The brain of the child, the brain of the child is the one who's going to give life, sustenance, to all the other parts. He's responsible. In other words, the parts need to be connected to the brain in order to get sustenance. If you cut you cut the child's nails off, they're going to stop. They're not connected to the source, they're going to start dying. Or any part you cut from the body is going to start dying. By the way, this is the concept of kares, by the way. Kares is not a punishment. Kares is an action that we do, that we cut ourselves off from the source. So this is what people do. So, in other words, every part of the child, it gets its sustenance from the brain of the child. That's where we were last time. And the same it is within a generation. Every Jew gets its sustenance from the tzaddikim of the generation. Let's call it that. From the rabbis, from the Rebbes, from the tzaddikim of the generation. Okay. So now we're all the way in the last word and the last line of page 8. We're going to continue. Ubeze yuvan. So now we're going to understand Ma'amar Razal, what the sages taught us. What did the sages teach us? Again, we're on page 10, all the way in the top. Al Pasuk, on the verse, Veledavka bo. There's a verse in the Torah that says that we have to attach ourselves to God. But it's problematic to attach yourself to God because God doesn't have a definition. There's nothing to attach yourself to. He's not intellect, he's not anything. There's no definition to God. There's no something that you can describe God as. So I can attach myself to something. If you tell me intellect is a high level, I can become intellectual. If you tell me emotions are the way to go, I can become an emotional person. I can attach myself to a certain emotion. But when you tell me to attach myself to God, it means nothing because God has no definition. So how am I supposed to attach myself to God? So the Torah itself says, you know how you attach yourself to God? The sages tell you how to explain these words in the Torah and to attach yourself in Him. How do you do that? So the sages tell us, Shekol hadavek betalmid chacham, anybody who attaches himself to a sage, me'aleh alav hakatuv, it is as if כאילו נדבק בשכינה, as if he attached himself to godliness. So it says, in other words, you want to attach yourself to God, there's only one way. Attach yourself to a sage. If you attach yourself to a sage, that's the only way to attach yourself to God. It sounds like Christianity almost over here, if you notice. In other words, you can't attach yourself to God immediately. It's not a direct thing. You need an intermediary to attach yourself to God. We'll have to discuss this soon. It's problematic.
What's a sage exactly?
Anybody who learns Torah, a rabbi, a Rebbe, let's call it, a leader of the generation, Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbi Akiva, the Rebbe. Examples. כי על ידי דבקה בתלמידי חכמים, through us attaching yourself to the sages, קשורות, what happens? נפש, רוח ונשמה של עמי הארץ, our regular souls, which are not refined, which are coarse, which are like the nails, which don't feel godliness, ומיוחדות במהותן הראשון, and they become expressed in their first essence. Let me explain what's going on over here. Tell you a story. There was once, today he's a chassid, but in that time he wasn't a chassid. He came into the Rebbe, to a yechidus, to a meeting with the Rebbe many years ago. And when he walked out, they asked him, isn't the Rebbe a great man? So he says, that's not what, it's true, it might be, but that's not what I experience. So they ask him, so what did you experience? He says, I experience that I am a great man. So they said, what are you even talking about? So he says, the Rebbe showed me that my essence is godliness. It's not that by looking at the Rebbe, I realized my actual true essence. In other words, the nail, when he is attaching himself to the brain of the person, is realizing that he's actually the DNA, that his DNA and the brain's DNA is the same. But that needs to be through the attachment. Because if there's no attachment, if he's cut off from the brain, from the sage, he will never have that experience. He will not experience that he is godliness. He would feel worldly. He would feel worldly matter, not godly matter. So it's not that God, it's not that the Rebbe or that the tzaddik is an intermediary between you and God. No. The tzaddik is the one that reveals in you that you are godliness. That's the difference between us and Christianity, by the way. It's a big difference, but we discuss it more later on. This is what it says. Miyuchadot, you experience that it is one, your neshama, b'mahutan harishon, with their essence, with the first essence. V'shorsham shebechokhma ilam. In other words, the nail experience that is actually part of the brain. He is the brain. In other words, the DNA in the nail and the DNA in the brain is exactly the same, and that's what the nail experiences. And the brain of the child is the same as the brain of the father. Like we learned before. So now we have a question. What about all those people who go against the sages? Throughout history, we have all those people, all those Jews who went against the leader of generation. Let's take the time of Moshe, Korach. Yeah? So it's true. When you see what happens, when you detach yourself from the leader, usually what comes? Death comes. Death is not a punishment. You chose not to get life. You cut yourself off from the source. So what happens when you're not cut off from the source? This is what happens. It's a consequence of one's action, let's call it. But you see that a lot of people don't respect the sages. Korach was in one case. Throughout the desert, 40 years in the desert, the Jewish people, throughout the 40 years, everybody went against Moshe. Except Aaron, except Miriam. But besides them, pretty much the entire nation is constantly going against Moshe. The question is, how are they staying alive? How are they getting the sustenance? We say that they should all be dead. You don't getting sustenance from the tzaddik. How are you getting sustenance? Let's give an analogy to this. My hand is attached to me. Because it is attached to me, it gets nourishment from the process that the brain, everything gives it. My whole body gives it to it. If it gets disattached, it will die. And that's it. I am not going to die, only my hand is going to die because it's disattached from me. Nevertheless, there's some people, God forbid, that the hand doesn't listen to the brain. What do you mean? The brain will tell them to go to the right, and they will either not move at all, or they will go to the left, or they will jerk somewhere else. In other words, they do not do, in some people, the hand is not responsive to the brain. So the question is, how is the hand still alive? So the same thing is going to be over here. It doesn't matter. The brain still gives it sustenance. Even though it's not listening to it, it's not cutting it off completely. It says, you know what, I'll keep you alive. That's what the brain does. Even though you go against me, I want to go to the right, you take me to the left. I want to go do this, you do the opposite. Even though you go against me, I'm still going to keep you alive. But I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy that I have to sustain you because you're going against God. You're going against what I tell you to do. I'm not happy with you. So that's what it's going to say now. Look at the brackets. והפושעים and the criminals ומורדים בתלמידי חכמים, and those who go against the sages, how are they getting sustained? How are they still alive? יניקת נפש רוח ונשמה שלהם, their soul still get life from the tzaddik of the generation, but they get their life מבחינת אחוריים של נפש רוח ונשמת תלמידי חכמים. But they're not getting the life from the face of the brain or from the face of God, but from the back of God. Let me give you an explanation of what does it mean. I think most of you will. After World War II, Eichmann ran to Argentina. You remember he escaped to Argentina. And the Mossad, I don't know if it was Mossad then, whatever it was, I think it was the Mossad, went to Argentina to take him. So just imagine, in Argentina, right now, there's a woman who's part of the group, right? She's part of the group, and she's in Argentina, and they bring Eichmann over to the apartment, where he's being going to be kept after they kidnapped him. They bring him over to the apartment. Now, she cooks. She cooks for the whole crew. Let's say, she's making a dinner for the whole crew. She's also going to make a dinner for Eichmann. Is there a difference in the way she gives the food to her son, for example, that night, or to Eichmann that night? It's the same food. It's the same sustenance. So he says there's a big difference. One she's going to give, please take, please get sustained, and the other she's going to just, I'm forced to give it to you. So it says, it's true. Those people are still alive. But you don't want to be alive from such negative energy. Let's call it this way. They are alive. The brain still sustains them. The tzaddik still gives them life. But God forbid you should want such a life. And we will discuss this life much later on in Tanya. Go ahead.
Why do we need an intermediary? Why can't we just
Excellent.
through the mitzvot and all the
Excellent question. Excellent question. We're going to deal with it throughout the Tanya with your question, but just to show you that we do, Why do we need a Moses? Do you remember what Korach said?
Why are you the leader? Why can't I be the leader?
He asked the question: if a house is full of Sefer Torahs, do you also need a mezuzah? Because the mezuzah is the one that protects the shul. So he says, if the house is full of Torahs, right? In the Torahs, there's much more. You have the mezuzah within the Torah. We are all holy. So why do you, Moshe, put yourself up on the lintel to say you're the top? This is exactly the question that Korach asked. It says we don't need a leader. We can all. This is exactly what he says. We can all connect to God. Yeah, we can all connect to God straight on. Who needs a leader? Yeah, we don't need a leader. Every Jew can connect to God. That's exactly what Korach was demanding, and he was right, by the way. And Korach was right. And we will need to understand why we need a Moshe. Obviously, God thinks we need a Moshe. The question is why? We don't need a Moshe. Every Jew, you come to shul. Yeah? The difference between Judaism and almost any other religion, I'm not sure about all the religions in the world, yeah, but in Christianity specifically, you needed the priest or you needed the church in order to connect to God. And even imagine, I can just imagine, if you go to church, you know what a church is? A church is a show. It's a play. What do I mean it's a play? People come, the rabbi gives a speech, and then there's some good music, and then you go home. You say a couple of verses, and then you go home. In other words, you're not a participant in the game, you're a viewer, you're part of the crowd. You come to watch. Judaism, when you come to shul, you don't come to watch a show. You are the player on the field. You're doing the game. So your question is very legitimate.
Without him, we can't play.
That's right. Without the 10th, we cannot even have a game. So your question is very legitimate. Who cares about the leader? Every Jew is holy. So we answered it a little bit. We said that the leader is not so important, but the leader is the one that reveals to you who you really are. He discovers the player inside you. That's what you need the leader for. Yeah, that's the idea, and we're going to discuss it throughout, yes.
Like if you take soccer, you need the coach. The players can play. Let's take the best team. They can play, they know how to play. The coach still has an important role.
Yeah. Otherwise, you wouldn't even know you were a player. You would be sitting within the crowd. Yeah.
On this topic about, an evil person or...
Not an evil person.
Well, I mean...
No, it's very important to say this. I just have to say one thing. When you ever read Tanya, it's a mistake that everybody does. We always assume it's somebody else. It's not somebody else, it's always us.
I understand.
Yeah, it's always us. So sometimes we go against the Rebbe, sometimes we go against the leader, we constantly go against God. I'll give you an example. Everybody knows throughout the days many things that you're supposed to do according to God. We don't do it. We constantly go against Him. So that's us. Now continue your question.
No, I mean, this thought that you're talking about, how Hashem just allows these people to exist.
Allows us to exist.
It's us. We're in that category.
Allows us to exist.
We're in that category.
Very good.
And I heard somebody say, maybe a rabbi, that a lot of that has to do with we're living off of the blessings of our forefathers.
So some of it is.
Maybe our ancestors, or maybe
Some of that is also true, which we're going. There's.
living off of the fumes of what they did good.
So some of this is also true, which we're going to discuss. There's going to be many reasons. That's one of the reasons. You're right.
Even Abraham, I think, was still living off
Yeah,
of...
that's right. So that's correct, and we're going to go through this later on also. That's one of the reasons. You're very good. But here now, again, I see that there's no Kabbalists over here, because if there would have been a Kabbalist, you will ask me a question from Kabbalah. The Zohar, so according to now, up to now, we established that the level of the soul that each and every one of us have has got nothing to do with us. It's whatever God gave every person. In other words, it's not my fault that I can't feel godliness. God made me a nail. God made me a heel. Some people, He made their neshama more refined. If they're a heart neshama, so-called, they can feel godliness emotions. If they're a brain neshama, they can feel intellect of God. I don't feel it. I get excited from an intellectual science just like I get excited from intellectual Torah. It's about the same. Sometimes from the science even more than the Torah. Yeah? I don't see I'm more refined to godliness than to Torah. For example, some people are more refined. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't get excited from science, he gets excited from Torah, and so on and so forth. Yeah? So it looks like that has nothing to do with me. So if you learned a little bit of Zohar, immediately you will know, hey, hold on one second. In the Zohar, it says that it does depend on human beings. It's not just dependent on God, what type of level of a neshama one gets.
Your mother and your father.
Oh, so let's look it inside. Uma shekatuv bazohar. So it says, but look, it says in the Zohar, and in the Zohar Chadash, and in the new Zohar, it's another part of the Zohar, Sha'ikar, that if you want your boy, your offspring, to have a high neshama, talui sheyekadesh atzmo b'shat hashmish, means that at the time that the person has relationship, in other words, where the inception takes place, a person has to be in a holy state. Davka, specifically. So over here we see that you do need, that we do have effect over the soul of the body. It's not just bringing from God. And then it continues, Ma she'en ken bnei yamei haaretz. It is not so by the people, by the masses, by the regular folks, that they don't have holy thoughts during that time. Hainu, then he explains, Mishum she'en lecha nefesh ruach v'neshama, because you don't have a soul, she'en la levush minefesh de'atzmut aviv ve'imo, that doesn't have a garment from his father and the mother. V'chol hamitzvot she'oseh, hakol yodeh oto levush, and all the commandments that he does is all through that garment. So let me explain. Let's do a little bit more, then I'll explain. ואפילו השפע שנזילו מן השמיים, and even the sustenance, the plenty, the gifts one gets from the heaven, הכל על ידי לבוש זה. Everything is through this garment. Let's explain what he's talking about over here. So, I'll give you an example. Rabbi Akiva had one of the highest neshamas that we had, that we know. The level of Rabbi Akiva's neshama was one of the greatest the Jewish people has ever seen. There's only one problem. At the time of his inception, I discussed this before, this is also relevant to us. By the way, the relationship part, you will notice that the Zohar and the Gemorahs and everybody else, when he's talking about the relationship part between the man and the husband and the wife, when he's talking about those parts, it emphasizes always the behavior of the husband. The behavior of the wife, he never talks about. And the reason is as follows. Women don't look at the act as the way we look at the act. It's complete. For women, the act is spiritual. Now, I'm not saying some women today cannot do it just for base level like men. Yeah? I'm not taking that. Inherently, the woman wants to do it for a spiritual manner. She's thinking about the closeness of her to the husband. And every male knows what we're thinking about. I don't have to expand on it. Male doesn't care. It's got nothing to do with no spirituality. So that's why he tells you, you need, if you want your son to have a source, a holy soul, you need to think about more things than base levels. You cannot be an animal, not during the time. If you're an animal during the time, that's what happened to whom? To Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had a very high level soul, but unfortunately, it wasn't able to get revealed within his body. Why? Because the body was so coarse. Let me explain this in modern terms. God gives the software. The software, and not just the software, the general chip. How do you call the main chip of the computer? The processor. We have a computer guy over there. Thank you very much. The processor of the soul, God gives. How many things it can do, everything is within the processor. We, the parents, give the communication between the processor and the body. In other words, what type of wires they're going to be. The wires can be made out of gold. The wires can be made out of light beams. The wires can be made out of copper. The wires can be made out of a substance that hardly transfers it, aluminium. I don't know what transfers data better or worse. That we give. In other words, the processor can be a very high-level processor. But if the parents didn't make sure that it can manifest in the body, it's not going to manifest. So that's what the Zohar is talking about when it says that the parents have to, it doesn't matter what kind of level of a neshama you get, the father, forget the parents, the father needs to have holy things. The holier his thoughts are, the communication with the body is going to be holy. This is why for the first 40 years in Rabbi Akiva's life, his neshama wasn't expressed in his body. And you know the story that his wife saw that he had a great processor. She saw that the problem is within the body itself. And that's why it didn't come through. And then when she revealed it in him, then that's when Rabbi Akiva flourished. One more thing.
So in other words, if you're a great neshama, it came down in a not so great body, it could be fixed in the future in a way. While you live in this world.
Theoretically, yes. Practically, between you and me, it doesn't happen very often. It's a story like Rabbi Akiva, you would hear it. Most people are stuck with what they are, and this is what we're going to get the Tanya for. The Tanya is a book, he says, look, I realize what processor I have, I realize what wires I have. What am I going to do now? Now, practically, you hear one story out of a billion of Rabbi Akiva, but not everybody is Rabbi Akiva, not the stories. So what does a regular person like me, how can I go out into the world and be a proper Jew? That's going to be our continuation from here. So this is Hakol, and then he continues, Afilu in neshama gdola, even if it's a very high level of a neshama, tzricha lekiddush aviv. It needs to the sanctification of his father. And again, look at what he says. Not the sanctification of the mother. The mother naturally is not looking for, everybody has been, not everybody, but some people have had the relationships, most of us had the relationships, and we know what women are looking for usually in relationship, and we know what men are looking. The wife is not looking for the act. She's looking for the connection. The husband, forget about the connection. Who cares about a husband looks for the act. We don't look for connections. Yeah? Aval, but he continues, Haneshama atzma, the soul itself, that we said before, everybody, the processor itself, what the soul is, which type of soul you're going to get? Hine lifamim nishmat adam gavoa le'en ketz. God works in mysterious way. And this, the next thing that he's going to say, happens more often than not. I don't know if more often than not. Happens on many occasions. That a very high level neshama, God would bring to a very low life people, husband. It's such a thing. In order to have free choice, God would many times take a very high level neshama and specifically put it in regular folks or in simple folks. Adam gavoa le'en ketz, a neshama which is extremely high, bal lihiyot, will come to be, bno shel adam nivze v'shafel, a son of a person who is a very low life, who is a very degraded person. כמו שכתב האריזל, if you want to learn a little bit more of this, it's not going to be our time, our place over here. We will learn about it later on. The Arizal explains this בליקוטי Torah, in ליקוטי Torah, פרשת וירא, ובטעמי המצוות פרשת בראשית. You want to expound on it, go learn the Arizal. But the idea here, again, like I said, that the neshama is a gift from God. There's nothing we can do about it. If you don't feel godliness, don't feel despaired. You want to feel godliness? You need to reveal the essence of the DNA. If the nail or the heel wants to feel godliness, it's almost dead. It's a dead thing. It doesn't feel life. Yeah? If he wants to feel godliness, he needs to reveal his DNA. And the whole Tanya is going to be how people like us who don't feel godliness will be able to feel godliness. That's the idea. That's where we're going. So in Perek Gimel, we're going to continue, but that's for next week. Now I will take some questions, again, that pertain to this, that we did today. Yes?
At least in modern behavior analysis, you look at the DNA, but it's one of few components. There is nurturing as well, how you bring up your children.
We will discuss nurturing later on. So, but over here, just so we don't make a mistake, we're not talking about over here. Don't make the mistake. I think I didn't explain it's good. Don't make the mistake that when I say the DNA, I mean physical DNA. We're not talking about the body over here. We're talking about the soul. The soul also has DNA. We're not talking about the analogy that we gave is an analogy. It's not how it is in the source. We're talking about a neshama. A neshama doesn't have DNA, obviously. But it's to understand what's happening over there, we're giving an analogy from the DNA over here. But don't make the mistake that I'm talking about the physical body over here. We're talking about how a neshama is made, something that none of us has any idea in. Yeah? So it's only an analogy.
Identical twins,
Mm-hmm.
not like Esau and Yaakov. They are raised in different ways.
Stop. Identical twins are me and Moshe. We're both, our neshama, my neshama, and Moshe's neshama are an identical twins. We both. Even though Moshe was raised in Paro's palace, he's still Moshe. Imagine if I was raised in Paro's palace. I would be 1 billion times worse than I am today. Moshe, even though his neshama was raised in Paro's palace. Me and Moshe are the twins, the neshama twins. We are the same. We came from the same source. He feels godliness, even though his upbringing was in Paro's palace. I had upbringing, let's say, by Rabbi Akiva. I'm his son. And my neshama is still going to be lower than his.
Coming from the same